This is our first episode of Tell the Story training, and so glad to have my friend Gabe here join with me today to be my guinea pig in many ways. And Gabe is married to the awesome Mel, who we know from church. And basically, Gabe, I just want to share with you basically how the story of God in many ways, or what the Bible tells about the world, about what's right with the world, what's wrong with the world, and where it's going, and how God has a plan to fix it in many ways. And I suppose ultimately just share with you, Gabe, and then get your response in some ways and see how it contrasts with what you think about Christianity, what you've heard in the past. But really to share what Christians believe, and and it's a 5-part story, and it'll take a few minutes, but hopefully it'll be worthwhile. And but I suppose like any story, it starts in the beginning, and it starts with God as creator. And that's no real value judgment on how old the earth is or things like that. But just as the Bible tells a story, it starts with God as creator, and He made everything perfect. That the universe was made perfectly, and that when I talk about perfect but not complete, right? Perfect, as in a perfect starting place, but humans were made by God to, I suppose, be in relationship with Him and journey with Him and grow and develop culture and develop civilization, but in a lot more harmony than what we see around us today. And when I say that God made everything perfect to begin with, I suppose I really want to focus on relationships. That there's 3 dimensions of relationships that God made perfect. That was the relationship between us and God. The kind of the first dimension relationship, humans and God, and then between humans and each other, a horizontal, I suppose you could say, horizontal dimensional relationship, and between humans and the rest of creation. So it's utopia in many ways, paradise, the Garden of Eden. Eden means delights in Hebrew, so it's the Garden of Delights in many ways. But God made everything perfect, and He made human beings with His image. He actually made human beings, as the Bible tells the story, to represent Him and to look after creation and to represent Him to creation, be the people that garden and develop, garden not just in horticulture and animal husbandry, but garden the minerals, garden human resources, kind of just develop human civilization. And we're made to represent Him. And in some ways, when the rest of creation, from the galaxies and the moon and the stars, looked at humans, or from the other direction, from viruses and bacteria, were to look at humans or mosquitoes, to see, these are God's representatives. We were meant to represent God. That was our purpose in many ways. So God made everything perfect, and it was good. And I know that you're into surfing. We've just been talking about that a little bit, and there's we mentioned how there's the immensity of the ocean. It does draw almost a spiritual response, and whether you're a Catholic background or animist background or whatever, there's this wow, we need to acknowledge something here. And I think that's part of the idea of God as creator, that we do see, as the Bible tells the story, because God is creator, there is an attraction in some ways, almost like a watermark. There's a watermark of who God is when we look at the stars, or there's a watermark of who God is when we look at the ocean, and that's how I see the world anyway. And so God made everything perfect, and it was good, and He made especially relationships, they were the way they should be, and God had a purpose for us to be in relationship with Him and to represent Him and to look after the rest of creation. And creation still calls us. I like to think of it, the garden still calls us. There's definitely something about our mental health when we can get out into nature in some ways. And I think that's part of the way God made things. But every story needs a bad guy, right? And so it starts in the beginning, the first part. The second part is the bad guy. The bad guys are humans. And we were given everything, and God gave us perfection, and He gave us perfect relationships, particularly with Him, gave us the perfect job to represent Him, and we rebelled against Him. as the Bible tells the story, human beings weren't happy with just being God's image bearers and God's representatives. They wanted to dethrone God, kind of kick him out of the picture, and be God for themselves in many ways. And when they did that, it's kind of like they introduced something into God's good creation that broke it. They introduced corruption. They introduced disharmony. It was like a perfect symphony to begin with, and they started singing discordantly, and it all fell apart. And so human beings are responsible for the pain and suffering in the world today, as the Bible tells the story. The thing that was broken most comprehensively were those three relationships, those three dimensions of relationship between us and God. Human beings, as the Bible tells the story, Adam and Eve ate of the fruit that they shouldn't have eaten, and rather than becoming like God, they were afraid and they became ashamed of their nakedness, and they hid from God, and they hid from the person who made them, and so that relationship was broken because they rebelled against him. They said, we don't want to be who you're calling us to be anymore. We want to determine who we want to be for ourselves, and so they gave up paradise in many ways. But not only did they break their relationship with God, they broke their relationship with each other. And as the Bible tells the story, the first two human beings started blaming each other, and their first two children, one murdered the other. And in many ways, when we look at the brokenness in the world today, I think that's because human beings are broken, from domestic violence all the way up to geopolitical conflicts, from human exploitation to kids getting disease. That's all because of human beings. So humans, kids getting disease, that's because we broke relationship with creation. We were, as the Bible tells the story, we were never meant to eat animals. We were meant to look after them. Viruses weren't meant to kill us, right? We weren't meant to be scared of pandemics. There wasn't meant to be tsunamis or natural disasters, or there wasn't meant to be death, basically. And we broke relationship with God. We corrupted it. We corrupted our relationship with each other, and we corrupted our relationship with creation. And we what God made perfect, we thoroughly infected. And I think I believe that's at the root of all the pain and suffering in the world today is human dysfunction. But it was never meant to be that way. And then I suppose the third part of the story is that God was committed to humans nonetheless. Even though we rebelled against him, was still committed to him. He was still committed to us, and he had a plan, and he chose one person. You might have heard of him. Sorry, I haven't mentioned your background. Actually, you kind of have a bit of a background with a Catholic upbringing in Brazil, and is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Growing up in Brazil is a predominantly Catholic country.
So
part of the culture.
So have you heard of the person of Abraham and his part in the biblical story? Does that name ring any bells?
I am familiar with that.
Yeah, sure.
So Abrahamic faiths.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Abraham is kind of like God's first part of the plan. Human beings rebelled against God, so God made everything perfect. Human beings rebelled and broke it all. But God's committed to human beings, and he had a plan. So he chose a guy called Abraham and said, through you, Abraham, all of the nations of the earth, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And then Abraham goes on to, you mentioned the Abrahamic faith, so Abraham goes on to be the ancestor of Israel, of the Jewish people. And God chooses a people. It's interesting as we read the story, his family is really dysfunctional. They got so many issues. And they end up as slaves in many ways, but God kind of sets them free from slavery and gives them a promised land to live in. And in some ways, it's kind of like, just like human beings were meant to be God's representatives originally in creation in the Garden of Eden. So the children of Abraham, the Israelites, the Jewish people, were meant to be God's representatives, but in many ways, they they made the same mistake. They repeat the story and they rebel against God. And there's all these kings come, and it's kind of up and down for Israel for a while, but basically they choose rebellion against God as well, and they end up being exiled out of their promised land. But God's still not done with humans. We've failed him every step of the way up to this point, but he says, you know what, I'm gonna keep my promise to bless all the families of the earth. So God didn't choose Israel because he wanted to make them the people that are blessed above everyone else. He chose them so they could bless everyone else, so they could be the avenue of fixing things, fixing what's been broken. But Israel rebelled, and God said, you know what, I'm gonna send someone who's perfect. You've had all these other kings, I'll send a perfect king. And I suppose that brings us to Jesus. Jesus comes and he claims to be that king. We use that term Jesus Christ. It literally means Jesus the Anointed, or Jesus the Messiah. Anointed Messiah means the same thing. He's the king. He's the king that God's promised. As the Bible tells the story, human beings have failed over and over again, but Jesus comes and he's like the true human, in the sense that he's the faithful human. He was faithful where Adam and Eve weren't faithful. They rebelled against God. He is faithful where Israel's been unfaithful. And he comes and he shows his authority as king. He teaches, he kind of reinterprets the law of Israel. He kind of reinterprets the traditions. He tries to show Israel how to get back on track with their original mission to be a blessing to the rest of the world. And he's killed for it. Jesus is executed by the religious leaders of Israel. But it's all part of God's plan, right? Because someone has to pay a price for the brokenness in the world, and someone has to win a victory over the brokenness in the world. So there's these two concepts of a price being paid and a victory being won. And Jesus, he's the one that pays that price. He's the one who's completely faithful to God and is innocent, whereas all of us have rebelled against God to some degree. And even today, rebellion against governments isn't necessarily looked on with mercy. It's still a capital offence in many parts of the world to rebel against a government, to commit treason. In some ways, all of humanity had committed treason against God, or has committed treason against God. But Jesus he's come to not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many, to pay a price. And he also wins a victory for us over this brokenness in the world. He wins a victory for us over death even. And but Jesus doesn't just stay dead. He dies. He pays a price for us. He wins a victory for us, but he doesn't just stay dead. He rises again. 3 days later, he's resurrected from the dead, as the Bible tells the story. And Jesus is wanting to fix everything that's been broken, everything that human rebellion has broken through just our own selfish choices, right? Our own dysfunction. Particularly those three relationships. Jesus is wanting to fix those three dimensions of relationships. He's wanting to fix our relationship with God, with him. He's wanting to fix our relationship with each other, and he's wanting to fix our relationship with creation. And so, when I look at the world and I see the stuff that's wrong with it, I see the ecological stuff, I see the human stuff at the individual level to the geopolitical level, when I see the existential stuff that's wrong with human beings about what's the purpose, what's the reason for living and all that kind of stuff, I see that Jesus fixes those things. And Jesus, as the Bible tells the story, is making all things new, and he's bringing the story to a completion, right? So every good story has a good ending, and some stories they go back to the beginning, but they develop the beginning. And so, as the Bible tells the story, there's we don't just go to heaven when we die, but God will make all of creation new again, and God himself will live with us in this new creation. and he's wanting to make us new and to fix everything that's been broken. But more than that, he's wanting to enlist Christians to partner with him, or people who will follow Jesus as their king, as this true king. People who will follow Jesus. He's saying, you know what, you want to be part of my kingdom, you want to follow me as king, then get on board with what I'm doing in the world. And I'm making all things new, Jesus says. So partner with me. Be the answer. Be the answer to the stuff that's going on in the world. Be the answer to the relational issues at the local level, at the global level. Be the answer to the issues with creation, those relationships that can be fixed. Because I'm the answer. And I suppose that's the story, right? From beginning to end. Just to recap, God is the creator who made everything perfect. That's how the Bible teaches the story. And we, as human beings, were meant to be his representatives. But then we rebelled against him, and in doing so, introduced corruption and brokenness, death into the world. And we broke relationships, the 3 dimensions of relationship between us and God, us and each other, and us and the rest of creation. But God was committed to humanity, and so he had a plan, and he chose a people to represent him. Those people failed, but God said, you know what? I'm going to send a perfect representative, a perfect human. And so in many ways, I see Jesus is the true human being, and he's the archetypal human being, right? And shows us how to be truly human. So when Jesus talks about power, when Jesus talks about money, when Jesus talks about human sexuality, when Jesus talks about politics or economic or whatever, he's showing us a new way to do those things, a new way to do economics, a new way to do power, a new way to do human sexuality, a new way to do whatever, a new way to do marketing and advertising, because that's the field that you're in. There's a different way to do that stuff. But then Jesus comes and he pays the price for us, for our rebellion, our treason. But he also wins a victory for us, a victory that makes it possible for us to partake in his kingdom now, and to partner with him in fixing what's been broken. And and I suppose for me, what that story means to me is, I've always wanted a cause. I've always wanted to follow a worthy leader. I've always wanted to follow someone who, there's a lot of politics in the world today. I don't really put, it's not unimportant, but I've got someone to follow, right? And I've got a mission. I've got something to be part of, something bigger, something that's hopeful. I've got, I remember at university wanting to find purpose. I was doing this course that I hated, but in Jesus I found someone I could follow, and someone who would give me a purpose to make my life mean something. All because we go through the ups and downs in life, and I've been through my fair share of ups and downs, and it's like, well, what is there purpose behind this? Is there a person? Is there a story that can make sense of all this stuff that I'm going through and can give it meaning? And I suppose I found that in Jesus in many ways. And it's more than that, but that's a very fundamental part of what this story has impacted me in. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of me. What are your thoughts? How is that something that you've kind of heard before, or is it a little bit packaged a little bit differently, or I don't know?
Well, I guess those are two separate questions. Yes, I've heard everything in bits, different parts and different threads and everything like that. But it was packaged in a different way. Yeah, it's more comprehensively, I guess, because it was a mixture of like your beliefs and behavior. Let's call it the now, you now.
Yep.
And tying it into this whole, let's call it the story, right, of Christianity, right? Like maybe we could have the story and the cause.
Yeah.
And that's and these things are not necessarily told together. So sometimes it's funny. I'll hear stories about Christian history, and it's just history. It sometimes it doesn't connect to the now a little bit, and then some people jump around to Jesus and their relationship with Jesus, but then they don't look back as to where did that come from. Where did you? It's just it's a bit in bits and pieces. So this was a bit more of a comprehensive take of the history, of the beliefs,
Yes.
and purpose.
Yep.
I guess.
Well, as a guy who works in advertising or marketing, like, stories are powerful, right? Stories do provide a context for meaning in many ways. Would you agree?
They're everything.
They're everything. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I'll be quoting more Hariri here, but like the author with the Homo sapiens and all that.
Yep.
But his thesis is what made humans stand out from Homo sapiens, break away from everything. It has been stories.
Yes. Yep.
So anytime you can tell a story, it carries on. It gets a lot more meaning. That's the unit that we keep things in our head. Because otherwise it's a bunch of facts and they don't come together. It doesn't really. Even with science or math or anything, once you tell a story of what's going on, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's funny you as a pastor checking with me. Does the story make sense? Because one way that the Bible is described, others is the great story ever told, right? And
yes,
and
when they say that, when Christians say that, they generally focus in just on Jesus, on his life and his life and death and resurrection, whereas his story is part of a bigger story. Like, why did Jesus need to come? Because there was brokenness. But what's the beginning of the story? In many ways, I try to talk about, a good story has a beginning, it has a bad guy, it has a plan, it has a decisive kind of victory, kind of moment, a moment of like
climax, right?
A climax, but it also has an ending as well. And I suppose that what I've described also describes a worldview, like a way to see the world. And
I think so. I guess in that, as you're telling me the story, I guess one part that I was asking, and I was analyzing.
Yeah.
I was listening, of course, I'm thinking, okay, there's the beginning, there's all that. But it comes in and then we're right. I guess the idea is, as a Christian practicing everything, you're working on that ending, right? I guess, right? Like, there's no ending yet, right? Where the story's still going. It's not over, right? There's a lot to come, I guess. But you're 100%. Trying to guide the ending. Your personal ending, but the world's ending, to a better place, right?
So my story is, so what I'm trying to do as well is I want to tell God's story and my story and show how they fit together, right? And I think that's common with stories is that one bigger one can give meaning to a smaller one, and they interact with each other. And for Christians, really, the idea is, our job's not over just because we go to church, right? Where there's something so much bigger. There's a bigger story to be a part of, and that's the cosmic story of the fixing of everything that's been broken. That means that really, I'm trying to challenge Christians to think bigger. Like, Christians should be at the forefront of things like social justice, obviously, and they have been historically, but sometimes we forget about it, in the modern world. But even things like the environment, that's a big part of the story that's often not told in Western Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
I think for me, like, following the story, what's just to give context for those, this, but I myself am not a believer, right?
Yep.
I'm familiar with everything, but not a believer. So every time we talk into the history, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful manner, there's an edge of a flavor of skepticism, right? Wait a minute, so analyze. But I thought it was interesting as how you broke it down into 3 dimensions, right? The relationship with God, relationship between each other, and relationship with creation, right? Now, the language is a spiritual language, right? Relationship with creation. You could definitely flip it over and do very much more material language, right? Relationship with the world, the environment, for example, right? The relationship with each other.
Yes.
And then the final one, the relationship with God, it's a relationship with yourself or the universe, meaning and things that are hard to measure or impossible to measure. So that's interesting. I think, and following the storytelling bit, I really like that framework. But then jump around and let's say as a skeptical person, then we jump very quickly into a very, let's call it pardon for the lack of, the mythological part of it. When I say mythology, it means the history with the spirituality element to it, right? Just right. And it, all of a sudden, as a skeptic, I might be like, whoa, we went from a very solid, tangible conversation about the three relationships directly to a mythological, like a part, like if I were using a more negative word, fantasy part of it, right? That's not so grounded. So you could lose someone.
Yeah.
And that's
for sure.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Now maybe you don't.
I was just saying, like, when I suppose worldviews have presuppositions, and I'm communicating I'm communicating those presuppositions, but so does scientific positivism also have presuppositions. Every worldview has a presupposition, and in some ways it's not my job to defend those. It's just my job to communicate those. All I'm saying is, I believe that God created. I'm not saying He did it in 6 days. Maybe He did. Maybe He didn't. Right? Maybe it was 6 billion years. Yeah. That's not important when I'm telling the story. The story is, you know what? This is the way. Story not as propositional truth, but story as worldview. Like, you know what? I believe that creation is important. I believe that human beings are important. I believe that human beings are important not because we're, not only because we're advanced organic beings, but because we have the image of God. And so, I hear what you're saying, and I get that. I get that it is that mythological aspect, but it's, or another way I'd say, it's presuppositional, and which everyone has. Everyone has that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to. It's not in the sense of criticizing. Oh, you can't jump, because that's the belief, right? Yeah. What I meant is. And it worked very well, is like tying. I felt like we put the framework, and then we went, it's like there's let's call it the tree axis, right? The framework. Yeah. And then we get into the timeline of beliefs. So sometimes maybe it's nice to guide the conversation instead of like, I don't know if that's the right way, like this is just a suggestion here, just I'm not saying that's the way, just to bring it up. Instead of telling that story linearly, chronologically, as it happens, tell the story tying it up through the framework.
Yep.
So maybe starting out, and then maybe look, the relationship with the universe or something like that, as I was confused. It's something we believe this was all in balance, and then we threw it out the window. Right?
Yep.
We messed it up.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it's nice to, then you throw the story, we get Garden of Creation, Adam and Eve, and things like that, right? And that's how we see it. That's the story tells of that disconnect.
Yep.
Overall.
Yep.
Then, and our story is like, we believe like the chance to reconnect, the reconnection again.
Yep.
I'm retelling the story here as I understood it. Abraham was like, hey, why don't we give this shot? Try this again. This reconnection.
Yep.
And then like always jumping back to the framework to explain like this is the belief for that kind of going. Because then I could see at one point I was always trying to, because I really like the framework, that helps. And then was always tying that, because if we're telling a story chronologically, I can get lost a little bit if I'm not particularly, let's not even call it skepticism, but if I'm not vested in it or something, then because I'm not interested maybe in the part of Abraham or something like that, and I lose the important part, I lose track of the story. And then when it comes to a part that might relate to me, I'm already lost. So even though that little bit, so maybe the going back to the framework really keeps the story about what does that mean to me, the listen, right? A little bit. Oh yeah, that part. Okay.
Yeah.
come back, like a little break in a conversation.
Yeah.
Kind of just get structure, because at the end it's about, I guess, and this is a fallacy of all of us, right? We're always listening to something. What's in it for me? Like,
Yeah.
how's this about
Sure,
me? Right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe it's a male thing, right? But
Yeah.
how's this about me?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for your feedback and your suggestions. It's definitely a something that's malleable. And look, there is I suppose there's a framework and there's signposts that we go on, but or there's a skeleton that needs to be fleshed out in many ways. So, Any other comments or thoughts, or maybe about the flow of the story itself, or the just like, you know what, that's I get that, or like I don't know, something's just like, oh no, that's ridiculous. How does that doesn't, or whatever.
No, I mean, look, there's a story, and there's, like, let's use the word, there are miracles involved in anything. So the whole thing, a miracle is both ridiculous, absurd, unbelievable by definition.
Yes, that's right.
Like,
it's not natural. It's not natural. Miracles aren't natural.
If you want to avoid that, it's going to be hard to tell the story.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, so look, it's a matter of, I think, and I'm trying not to taint it with my own aspects, but I like the concept of, like, there's between beliefs, and then there's also the aspect of faith, right? It's that might want to be touched upon, is like the stories, that it's. I think sometimes it can be difficult, and I definitely know you're not along these type of guys, is stating these things as facts, and that's okay if you believe in real, but it doesn't matter, because you're not making a scientific thesis here.
No.
You're making a thesis of faith. This is the story.
Yeah, that's right.
About this. This is represent. Because maybe somebody pushes back. So how do you know? And that's like, look, this is the lesson. This is the story. And I like very much a movie is the Ledger of Bagger Vance or something in the West. But long story short, at the end of the Western movie, the reporter's interviewing some hero of the Old West, right?
Yeah.
And then after the whole story, the reporter's telling it back to the cowboy, the hero, right? And he says, "Look, but that's not the truth. Here's what really happened and everything." And the reporter says, "Sir, this is the West. When the legend becomes the story, print the legend." And it doesn't matter. It's like a lot of debate comes out. Like, apparently Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake."
Yep.
But it doesn't matter. Yeah. The fact that everybody kind of believes that story, that's not the point now. It's
interesting. It's interesting. I suppose there's debates even within Christianity about the effects of modernism and the effects of postmodernism. And obviously story is a very postmodern kind of concept.
Right.
But, we've grown up with the idea of teaching Christianity to a modern audience of propositional truth. And so I'm trying to find, I feel like I have good answers for people's questions, even, scientific questions, right? Why is there something but not nothing, right? Why is there this? And that's a legitimate philosophical and even scientific question, which is still theorized about. And my answer to that is, well, there's a creator, and that's not necessarily an infantile answer. That's defensible philosophically. That's defensible in other ways. Just as defensible as a scientific positivism or naturalistic worldview, or a whatever. I'm seeing a growing rise of scientism in the world today, where and so it's just as valid as that in many ways. But it is interesting, and I suppose this is a tool that we're refining, and we're wanting to be able to communicate. We're just wanting to tell what we believe, right? How is it different to how other people might have tried to communicate what Christians believe in the past?
I think I think as again, it comes back to that framework and tying it
Yep.
to the story along,
Yes.
and my suggestion for the story for you, if that works for you or something, is tie it more, keep
Yep.
refreshing back to the framework more
Yep.
as you're telling the
Yep.
chronology of it.
Yep.
So you did the framework and then you explained the chronology.
Yep.
And that's it. So I like that. A
Yep.
bit different.
Yep.
Because usually what do you have is either a discussion on the chronology of it, the history, and then there's some debates over that.
Yep.
And it almost seems detached from the current purpose or
Yep.
struggle.
Sure.
I don't
Yep.
know what
Yep.
matters of faith
Yep.
and purpose,
Yep.
beliefs in the moment.
Yep.
And it comes down more to justify. It's interesting because a lot of times it's more to justify the history gets used to justify some position,
Yep.
whatever good or bad in that sense. But it almost forgets like that. That's when I guess we're talking about like that this is an ongoing story, that
Yep.
it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
You're
Yep.
working towards that. So I like that aspect.
Yeah.
Maybe and it's nice because it brings us, you and me, into the story.
Yep.
It's not like I'm in the club, I belong, everything is done, and now
Yes.
I can wear a bad
Yep.
Christian.
Yep.
No. This is gonna go on,
Yep.
know.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and then it's part of it. And here's what's been done in the past. This is what we're working on.
Yeah. Yep.
So I like that tying up
Yeah.
of it, so it's more complete.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
uh,
Awesome.
yeah, it's good to be able to talk about the
Yeah.
whole thing in the context. And,
Excellent. Well,
it's,
sorry, what was that? You
no,
cut
it's
out.
just that you're talking about the universe and things like that. It's no, we're still here, but you come in because you've been introduced to the awesome help. So when you make an appearance, it'll help our likes and views.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, Mel. So,
This is my agent and producer. So all fees and negotiations go
Yes.
through
yeah, that's good.
through her.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, Mel, we've just had a great discussion. Gabe's given some great insight and interaction, and he's been a great first guinea pig for this, and yeah. So thanks so much, Gabe. Really appreciate it. And
No,
Yeah.
no worries. And I was going to say just recently, because you were talking about universe and creators and all that stuff. I've been reading a lot about cosmology,
Yep.
right? Like the universe expansion and
Yes.
everything. And that stuff, like,
well,
it
you know,
blows your mind, like trying to get your head around it. It's like, whoa.
what I've learned recently about, I suppose, science in terms of cosmology is relatively fluid, right? It's changing all the time. But what I've been reading is that the initial conditions of the universe in like the first 10 to the minus 80 of a second, they had to be really balanced, really precise. And you're talking about a singularity exploding, but there's also there's raw power and force, but there's also an incredible amount of fine tuning that had to. So it's kind of like the anthropomorphic kind of argument that the universe is almost tailor-made for human life, even going back to like the very first moments, like the 10 to the minus 80 seconds, like the balance of everything had to, and so I said, well, creator, right? And then other people come up with different answers for that, but yeah, it is interesting.
Oh no, it is, and I mean, I find it very.
Can you do that?
Yeah, we're going on that. I just find it funny because even coming from very scientific, and
I'll leave you to wrap up.
I mean, if you were a movie producer and you wanted to like a scene of, let's do the Bible, and you have let there be light, you couldn't come up with a better theory than the Big Bang.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just kind of,
Yeah,
it's literally that.
yeah, that's right.
So,
Yep.
so it's kind of funny because the hardest scientific one is So it's interesting to see where it goes.
It is interesting. It is interesting. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for your time, and
I hope it And I'm like just trying to don't take anything I say like as a point. It's just maybe, as I said, I bring a lot of biases and
No,
things. So,
we really appreciate your perspective, and so I'm sure this will be a helpful contribution to what we're trying to do at Every Nation Melbourne. So once again, Gabe, really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
no, thanks, Ken. And then see you soon. Well, I think I guess the permit soon. There might be chicken wings in the future again.
Come on,
right?
man.
Like,
Come on. Come on.
Is it on? Chicken wings on again?
Yeah, we definitely should do it. All right. Well, I'm just going to say goodbye, but don't go, okay?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, see ya.